I did film a video very similar to this when I first started my booktube channel, but you know what? I just want to talk about these books again, so sue me. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for being here today. It is so great to have you. So today, I wanted to do a little just chat recommendations video about the best books that I have read of all time. I recently rewatched Normal People, which, spoiler alert, it's in this video. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I rewatched the show and I just like cried my eyes out and remembered how much I love that book, and it sparked me to think about all of the other books that I have just read throughout my lifetime that I have absolutely stuck with me and I love, and I want to share those with you today. So all of the books that I'm going to be sharing with you, I have some deep emotional connection to, whether that was like a time in my life when like I remember something very significant, or if it just really spoke to me, I just like, it's really stuck with me. I think about these books all of the time. I just want the entire world to read these books too. Before we get into the video, I want you to comment down below your favorite book that you've read of all time, and if you can't think of just one, just leave a list. Like, I just want to know what people love that are watching my channel, and I just want to talk about this with you, so please comment that down below. Let's just get into the books. We'll just get the one out of the way that I already mentioned. The first book is Normal People by Sally Rooney. People I feel like are so polarized on Sally Rooney. They either love her or they hate her, and I am someone who absolutely loves Sally Rooney. Normal People is a romance kind of about these two people, Marianne and Connell. They truly have miscommunication issues with each other. It kind of follows them over decades as they have, you know, a relationship in high school, go off to college, and there's just constantly miscommunication between them. They both know they like want to be together, but like they're just not communicating with each other, and it just leads them to think that one person is feeling one way when they actually might be feeling another way. I actually don't have a copy of this book. I don't own a copy. I listened to it on audio at first, and shocker, I gave it 4 stars at first, but this is a book that has sat with me for so long. I've literally never forgot about this book. And so initially I gave it 4 stars, but now I go back and it's a 5-star read. Like, there's no way I can sit here and think about a book that I read over 3 years ago or 2 years ago and not give it a 5-star. Like I said, I just rewatched the show and it just reminded me how much I love this book. The characters of Marianne and Connell are not your typical characters that you read in a story. Like, they are majorly flawed. They're just kind of like quirky and like a little bit of like the outsiders. I don't know. I absolutely loved it. If you enjoy watching my channel, I really hope you like Sally Rooney because she's one of my favorites. 100% would recommend it, at least giving it a try. I totally understand if you end up not enjoying it. Like, I get it. That book is not for everyone, but I really loved it. And I just like love how like raw and vulnerable Sally Rooney's writing is. It's amazing. Also, just an FYI, if you haven't read it yet, there's no quotation marks throughout the book, so that bugs a lot of people sometimes. All right, so the next book I want to talk about is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book is perfection. I know everyone knows and loves this book. It is a booktube darling. Literally everyone has probably heard about this book, and I am no different. I absolutely love it as well. This is a book about Linus. He is a caseworker. He works for this like magical youth like case management or something like that, and he gets assigned to a task to go to this orphanage, which is on kind of like the outskirts of this island, and he has to manage the case out there. There's apparently some children who are just major misfits, and he is sent to kind of deal with this orphanage. Well, lo and behold, Linus gets there and his heart is turned from steel into gold, and it's just a beautiful story. It is really a story about found family. It's about learning not to judge others. One of the children is the Antichrist, and it's very like intimidating to Linus at first, but if you look under the surface, there's just so much more to these children than what society has deemed them to be. It is very humorous. I laughed at multiple parts. I cried. This story really holds a very special place in my heart. So this book came out in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of, you know, all of the protesting around our country, and it just was a great reminder to everyone to not hold such strong opinions about people from the outside, because on the inside there's so much more. And it was just so beautiful and genuine, and like just a great reminder that like, don't judge people. I would 100% recommend this book to anyone. I think literally anyone could enjoy it. It was very much like Pixar movie vibes, and I absolutely loved it. So 100% would recommend if you have not read it already. Next book on my list is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a book that, again, booktube darling, everyone knows and loves. And I am, again, no different. She is incredible. Taylor Jenkins Reid can just tear my heart out and throw it on the floor and I'd be fine. So Daisy Jones and the Six, if you haven't read this book yet, this is about a rock band in the 70s. You're following Daisy Jones as she kind of begins to form this band, her rise to fame, and then their kind of downfall. It is about the lives of the members of the band, their relationships with each other. It is just an amazing, amazing book. I read this book at a time when I was not reading a lot. Like, I literally hadn't read anything in college and in grad school, and I had picked this book up literally right when I graduated grad school, and I immediately fell back in love with reading. I read this book 2 times in 1 year because I loved it so much, and I'm due for another reread soon. One of my favorite things to like watch or consume content in general is just like Hollywood life. Like, I love learning behind the scenes of how movies are made and the inner lives of celebrities. I think it's so interesting. I really loved reality TV. This book is right up that alley. So if you haven't heard, Taylor Jenkins Reid is kind of doing this, it's not a series, but it's like a collection of books, all based in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And this one was the one for the 70s, and it was just amazing. I really loved not only like that celebrity culture that she had in this book, but then also I really loved the relationships between the band. The way that it's also written too is in a podcast, so if you listen to it on audio, it's literally one of the most amazing audiobooks I've ever listened to because the way that it's written is meant to be listened to. Could not recommend this book more, especially if you do love celebrity culture or are just intrigued by it in any way. I think you would really, really enjoy this. I think it adds a lot of depth, even just more than the surface level of like the celebrity culture. You really get an inner working of their lives and of their thoughts, and I could not recommend it more. It was so good. I really, really can't wait for Carrie Soto's Back to come out. I think that one is going to be amazing. I'm going to do a whole reading vlog for it. I already know. I cannot wait. The next book I have to talk about is the Nevermoor series. This is the 3rd one in the series. It all encompasses the Tales of Morgan Crow. This is by Jessica Townsend. It is a middle grade series following our main character Morgan, who is destined to die on her 11th birthday. She knows she is going to die, and it's basically a matter of time for her until that happens. Well, her 11th birthday comes around, and this mysterious man named Jupiter North ends up whisking her away to this like mysterious world that she's never heard of, and she basically gets a second chance at life in this magical world. I know that synopsis sounds like depressing in the fact that she knows she's gonna die, but basically when she gets to Nevermoor, the world just opens up. This is an incredible middle grade series. The world is constantly developing, and throughout each book, we've just gotten more and more and more, and I'm so excited to see where this is going to go. This book just gave me all of the nostalgic feelings. Like, I remember reading it and I just felt like I was transported back to my youth, reading this book that I could not get enough of in the summer times and just sitting out in the back, and like I just was transported to me reading as a kid, and I loved it, and that's why I have such an emotional connection to this series. Even if you don't like middle grade, seriously give this a try. But if you like fantasy, like this is a fantasy novel, so you have to like fantasy in order to be able to probably enjoy this book. Jessica Townsend is a force to be reckoned with, and I can't wait to see how the entire series is going to play out. Literally, I think I've given 5 stars to every single one of them. Wait, maybe I've given this one 4 stars, but first 2 were out of this world. Next book I have is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. I read this book. It was kind of like a year after I started reading, but I remember this was the first book that I had read, I think in the year 2020, and it was my favorite book of the entire year. I'll never forget literally sitting on my couch reading the end of this and just bawling my eyes out and absolutely loving every single second of it. This story follows our 2 main characters, Roya and Bahman, and they are young lovers. They meet in this stationery shop. They start to form a budding romance, but it is set in 1950s Tehran, where there is a lot of political turmoil happening at the time. Basically, you are following them as they start to form this romance, and then a coup happens, and Roya never sees Bahman again. She never hears from him. She tries to reach out from him. Nothing. No contact at all. So she ends up having to move on with her life. 60 years later, you find this out right in the beginning of the book, they end up being able to meet again and kind of talk about what had happened and where their lives had gone. It is a dual timeline story. You're following them in 1950s Tehran, kind of following their relationship, but then you're also following them when they have met those 60 years later, where Roya is getting all of those questions answered as to where he had gone. I cried my eyes out reading this one, and I'll never forget it. It was just such an amazing reading experience. Again, I need to reread it just because I feel like this book gave me all of the feels that I needed. And you know what? It is a historical fiction, but I'm not even that big of a historical fiction reader, and I really, really enjoyed this. Like, I feel like literally anyone could love this book. The writing is incredible. I mean, so many quotes in here that are just out of this world, and I would truly, truly recommend it if you have not read it already. It's a very short book. I feel like The Stationery Shop is just, in general, a book that a lot of people could enjoy. It is definitely delves deep into characters, but you're following these characters over quite a long span of time, and it destroyed me. Those are the kind of books that I would 100% love to read, and that's why I really enjoyed this book. So if you like that too, maybe you would like this book. So continuing on with a few series recommendations that I have. One of my favorite series of all time, every single book I think I've given 5 stars. That is the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. I know she's a chunker. I am like 2/3 of the way into this book right now, and wow, it's amazing. So the Stormlight Archives is an extremely epic fantasy series. Each book is literally 1,000 pages. The quick overall gist of this series is there is a war going on between the humans and non-humans. It is a massive war that is happening, and you are really, really in depth following every single move that the characters are making in this book. It's multiple point of view. It's very, very epic. It's very intricate, in depth. I will say, I mean, they're very slow books to start off with. Like The Way of Kings, which is the first one in this series, I literally couldn't get into. It took me at least 500 pages to get into it. So it's a commitment if you actually end up reading them. But like, wow, I have never felt so immersed into a world as I have when I've read these books. The way that he writes, yes, he like has a lot of that intrigue and like politics, and you know, there is some stuff that is more complicated, but in general, it is so easy to read, and like you can follow it fairly well. I know they are very intimidating novels, but like seriously, if you are interested in this, just at least give the first book a try. I know it's a doozy and it's really, really long and intimidating, but like honestly, it's totally worth it. I am not the type of person who can like super binge read a 1,300 page book, but like every single time I pick these books up, I'm just immersed into the story, and I like literally get transported away from what I am doing in my real life, and I am transported into this fantasy world, and it's absolutely amazing. I don't think I've ever read anything else that can compare to this, but I know that there are stories that can compare, like Game of Thrones or Dune or Wheel of Time. Those are all kind of in the same category, but this is the first one that I have read that is in these major epic fantasy series, and absolutely loved it. Would 100% recommend it if you enjoy epic fantasy. Honestly, can't recommend them enough if you are interested in reading them. Last book in a series I have is actually a recent read, and that is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. Ugh. Okay, first of all, I've never read a graphic novel, and I read these and I'm like, nothing else is ever gonna compare to this. I don't know how I'm ever gonna read another graphic novel beyond these because they were so, so good. I've read the first 3 in the series. I am going to be reading the 4th one this month, but I just can't even. I never thought I would cry reading a graphic novel, and I absolutely cried reading these. So if you are living under a rock and don't know what Heartstopper is about, it is about Nick and Charlie. They become very, very close friends in high school, and their friendship ends up starting to blossom into a relationship. And throughout the books, you are watching as Charlie and Nick form this beautiful romantic relationship. You are exploring the topics of sexuality, you're exploring topics of bullying, and let me tell you, as you get into book 3, and I'm sure I've heard more as you get into book 4, there are even more serious topics that are covered. Like House on the Cerulean Sea, I feel like this is the most wholesome content in the entire world. The show and the book brought me to tears. I just feel like Alice Oseman knows how to write teenagers. The way that she portrays these characters in certain situations, and like the kind of little quips that they'll say to each other, or like the little humor that they insert, it's just perfect. Like, I wish I could just like portray the emotion to you that I felt when I was reading this. I actually do have a reading vlog about it, which you can see my reaction to reading them, and I'm just like, it's absolutely incredible. I will never stop thinking about these books. I will never stop reading these books. I absolutely loved them so much, and I could not recommend them to every single person in the world. Okay, now moving on to books that I maybe wouldn't recommend to everyone because they're really freaking sad. If you have been watching my channel for a while, you know that I love a sad book. I love a sad book. The first one I want to talk about in the sad book category is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a memoir of a young woman who in college, she was sexually assaulted by a swimmer athlete at Stanford. This was a very big news story back in like 2016 when I was in college, and she wrote a book about her experience of that entire experience, and then also the court experience too, of like going and trying to get justice for what this man did. This was so hard to read, first of all, but it was so beautifully written at the same time. You know, I'm trying to explain myself right now into terms of how I feel about this book, but I can't even explain it because it's so difficult for me to try to put into words what this woman went through. You know, in our world, we hear about sexual assault cases very, very frequently, way too frequently, and you don't realize all of what actually happens in these trials. And that's kind of what she goes through. She goes through the emotional piece as well as what actually happened in court and like the aftermath of the whole thing and of the real thing. I mean, it was just like, I can't even put into words how impactful this book is. It will forever sit with me. I don't think I will ever look at this book and not just be reminded of how this book impacted me. I don't think this book is for everyone though. I think you have to be in a really healthy mental space to be able to read this. I found myself very often putting it down and needed to take a break because it was really, really hard to get through. But I also think that that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be read. Like, yes, I rated this 5 stars, but this should be rated like 6 billion stars. Obviously, trigger warnings for sexual assault and rape and women's oppression. But I feel like I can't even explain to you the weight that this book holds in my brain. Sorry to send us off on more of a somber note, but I really think this book needs to be talked about more, and this book is just so incredible. So the next book I have to talk about is another memoir, and that is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. This is a book that I read when I was in PA school, and it made such an impact on me. This book is a memoir, but it is kind of based in medicine. It is about a young doctor who, right as he is graduating his fellowship, gets diagnosed with stage 4 terminal lung cancer, kind of writing about his experiences, just grappling with the reality of his situation. So the book is about this man's life, and obviously he has spent his entire life up to this point in training and in school to become a neurosurgeon. So for those who are unfamiliar with how the medical system works in America, basically for medical training, it is an all-consuming profession. You are in the trenches. It's a very, very grueling and intensive training program. So this book kind of follows his experience as he goes from a medical student to a resident to a fellow, and so learning how to treat patients to him ultimately becoming the patient. I read this at a time when I was going through my medical training, becoming a PA, and you know, I was having all the same feelings that he had while he was going through this, and it was just such an amazing read to parallel with my experiences at that time, because it really brought a different perspective to the way that I was interacting with my patients and whatnot, and really thinking about, you know, what is the ultimate meaning behind of all this? You know, yes, I want to help people, but like, I feel like I want to like explore this larger meaning of, you know, life. And I think that's what a lot of people, when they're going into medicine, and I think this book really tied all of that up very, very well. It talked about morality, talked about mortality, and just how can you grapple with all of these thoughts, especially coming from someone who has trained into doing medicine as a profession. I think one of the things that really impacted me reading this book is that as a medical student and a medical professional, he is so goal driven, and it's just like, just get to the next, get to the next, get to the next. But now he's at the stage where like he has gotten, you know, as far as he can, and now he's diagnosed with a terminal illness. It just is the mindset shift that you never almost expect to have to deal with, especially as a younger person, and especially like in medicine, having to grapple with that so young. I cried so much in this book. Honestly, I read this book so quickly, and it's left such an impact with me. If you are a medical professional or even like paramedical, I would 100% recommend reading this. It is truly impacted me from the moment I read it, and I honestly feel like it is such a profound book to read as the perspective from a medical professional. So 100% recommend. Could not love that book more. And the last book I have to talk about is the one you have been waiting for, the one we all know I'm going to talk about in this video, and that is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. If you've been following my channel for a while, you will know that I love this book. Not love, just it has left the biggest impact with me for any book that I have ever read, which is why I think it is the best book that I have ever read. So this is a book that follows a group of 4 friends after college and throughout pretty much their entire lives. But one of the friends, Jude, has a very, very traumatic past and backstory that you are kind of discovering as you are reading this book. It is not a book that I recommend. Like, genuinely, do not read this book unless you are in such an amazing mental health space that you can process that. Please look up the trigger warnings, because there are trigger warnings for literally every trigger warning that could be ever made is in this book. A lot of trigger warnings for sexual assault, substance abuse, physical abuse, self-harm. Those are just to name a few. But seriously, look up all the trigger warnings before going into it, because I did. And yes, I mean, I guess it could be like spoilers, but I personally want to know that stuff going into the book so I can mentally prepare for it. The reason that this is the best book that I've ever read is because I can never stop thinking about this book. It has impacted me more than any book I've ever read. The characters feel so real to me. I have never felt that way reading a book than I did with reading this one. I felt like these people were some of my closest friends. I felt like I was in that group with them. The way that Hanya Yanagihara develops these characters is absolutely incredible. The fact that I can feel this sort of connection to a fictional character is absolutely insane. And that's why I love this book so much. Do I think that it is over the top with the trauma that happens in this book? Yeah, absolutely it is. It's honestly, it goes way too far. And there's some stuff in this that I'm just like, that didn't even need to happen. I'm already out feeling all the feels. Like, you didn't need to go there. I've never stopped thinking about it. And I think that is a sign for me of a really, really good book. One, like a book that really sticks with me, like Normal People did, this did, or like When Breath Becomes Air did. Those are signs of really, really good books to me. And that is why these are all of my favorite books. This is my favorite book of all time. I will reread this book at some point. I just have to like wait for it to be long enough for me to be able to reread it. I would get a tattoo for this book for real. So those are all of my favorite books that I've read of all time. They are the best of the best books that I can think of and that I've ever read. And honestly, I hope to be adding more to this list as I keep reading more books. If you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to give me a thumbs up or hit the subscribe button. I would absolutely appreciate it. And if you've reached the end of this book, give me a 100, because all of these books are 100 to me. And I hope you commented your 100 book, your best book that you've ever read down below. Thank you all for being here. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.